Hi everyone, this is Miss Brown and I'm here to talk to you about your upcoming speeches and helping you get ready. I know we've talked briefly about speech structure and you've actually taken a quiz on speech structure, but I want to review it again and then kind of help you through the speech making process. If you've never given a research speech before, then this might be a new process for you and I want to walk you through that. So what I've done here is I've opened up Word and I want to kind of talk you through that process while actually showing some notes. So I'm going to glance occasionally down to my keyboard so I can see things, so bear with me. So a speech has the same structure, a similar structure than a paper. So it has an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. So you've seen the structure before, you've seen it with your papers, but we're going to talk about how it's a little different when it comes to a speech. So the first act is to find and fall in love with a topic. The more you like the topic, the easier the process is going to be. You fall in love with the topic and your next stop is the library. You need to do some research and find a good number of sources to help support your information. You want to make sure they're credible, make sure they're believable, so people hear them out loud that they're going to trust that information. So you have your research, you have some ideas about what you want to say, now you're ready to put together the speech. That went quick, didn't it? So the first place you start is the body of the speech. The body of the speech is the heart of the speech, is where you spend most of your time. So for example, if we're giving a 5-minute speech, which you are, you want to think 3 minutes for the body, you want to think 1 minute, spell a word here, 1 minute for the introduction, and then 1 minute for the conclusion. That's a good balanced speech. It's also not a lot of time, so don't feel like you gotta take on the world in a small speech. You should think about leaving them with enough information that they're interested enough to want to learn more. Just give them a little taste of information. So if the body of my speech is 3 minutes, and I have 3 main points. So let's say first main point, second main point, third main point. That means that I'm spending 1 minute per main point. That's not a lot of time. That's why I have you do your impromptus in 1 minute so you can get a feel for what 1 minute is. So let's think about it this way. So if I'm researching, I'm done my speech and I know the 3 key things I want to share, I'm going to first in my main point kind of state my information in my own way. Make sure I've defined terms, making sure it's clear what I'm trying to say. Then I'm going to bring in at least one outside source. So I'm going to share one outside source. So that means I'm going to say the information and verbally cite it. And we're going to practice that here. So I'm going to share that information, I'm going to verbally cite it, and then I'm going to explain that information. So just because I share a quote or a fact from an outside source doesn't mean I'm going to automatically get it. You need to take a moment and say what this quote means or what this says or how this proves this point. You need to explain that information. And then you're going to wrap up that information. Maybe bring all that information together in a nice little summary. Not very long though, so you see there's a lot going on in one main point. You're sharing your information, you're bringing in an outside source, you're announcing it, you're giving a verbal citation, then you're going to take a moment, think sentence or two to explain that information. How did that information prove your point or to expand your information? And then wrap up that information. That word there. So some way that makes that main point feel over. And then you'll do that for all the main points. It's not a lot of time. So 1 minute can go very fast. So again, don't feel like you got to take on the world. So once you've got the body of your speech, the heart of your speech, then start thinking about your introduction. How am I going to start that speech? And the introduction has 5 parts. The first one is an attention getter. This is you grabbing our attention. It could be a story, it could be a quote, it could be something funny. It's just a couple of sentences of you grabbing our attention. Because your classmates, they're listening to 20 speeches, so that's a lot. So how are you going to grab my attention? How are you going to make me really want to listen? Because remember we talked about listening, and listening takes time and motivation. It takes a lot of work. So how are you going to grab my attention and say, listening to me for 5 minutes is worth your time, and here's why. Let me grab your attention. You also need a thesis statement. Hopefully you've heard of this before from writing a paper. Hope so. And you want to think one sentence, one subject and one verb. Don't go crazy making it complex. You should be able to boil down a 5-minute speech into one sentence. If you cannot, that is a sign that you're taking on too much. So make sure that you can do one sentence, one subject, one verb. And watch your verb. So for your informative speeches, that verb should be truly informative. If it's a persuasive, that verb should be truly persuasive. So that's a big key. If you're looking at that verb choice in that thesis statement, it should be clear what you're trying to do. Now, you also need to relate the topic to the audience. So last week we did a discussion board and we did an audience analysis where you're sharing your thoughts. And what I want you to do next is to go back and look at the replies. And that is essentially your audience analysis. And your classmates are sharing information and their insight about how they feel about your topic. So if you decided to give a speech about dog ownership and you go to the discussion board and you find out that most of the class doesn't even like dogs, that's going to inform you about how to put together the speech. Because, let's be honest, the speech is for them, it's not for you. You're putting it together for an audience. So do be sure to look at that audience analysis, but that is a good place to pull information to cite in your introduction. You can actually say, hey, according to our audience analysis, 60% of you already own a dog, and the rest of you are thinking about getting a dog. So this relates to you because you're probably right in the middle of dog ownership. So feel free to actually quote information from the audience back to them in the introduction. Because people, again, are stingy with their time. They're not going to listen to something unless they're interested. You also need to share your personal credibility. Why are you a credible source on this topic? Now, you don't have to have a college degree to be credible. You need to at least have something that makes you stand apart from an ordinary person. So it could be education, a credential, it could be work, it could be job experience, it could be your hobby, maybe you had life experience. Something sets you apart. Take a sentence or two and share what that is. It could be as simple as, you know what, I've always loved mushrooms, and whenever information's out there about mushrooms, I want to study in how they're made or how they're used. Boom. And then you stand apart. So think about what makes you stand apart and share that. Your final thing in the introduction is the preview statement. And this is you sharing where we're about to go. So before you start the introduction, you're going to tell us what your main points are. This becomes really difficult for new speech makers because they think, well, I'm about to say it, might as well just go and say it. Well, no. The audience has to get ready for what you're about to say. It's like if I put you in the van and I was going to take you somewhere, the first thing you would say is, where are we going? The preview statement is where we're going. So today we're going to cover the following topics. We're going to cover this, and then cover this, and then cover this. Then you go right to the introduction. So when you're looking at the introduction, you want to make sure that your attention getter is always first. It's not, hi, my name is. It's, let me grab your attention, and then go right into my speech. And then the last thing is the preview statement. Where are you going to take us? The other things in the introduction, the thesis, the relating, and the credibility, they can come in any order. In fact, they can actually overlap. For instance, you can actually relate to the audience while you're doing the attention getter. So, like if you're doing a hypothetical example that gets them thinking about something, then you've actually related to the audience and did an attention getter at the same time. So that's possible. Just make sure the attention getter is first and the preview is last. So you have your introduction, you have the body of your speech. Now you're ready to put together the conclusion. A couple of things are going on here. I'm going to scroll down here. First, you're going to restate your thesis in some way. So for your last speech, a lot of you repeated the same thesis over again, which was fine. And some of you actually restated it in a different way, which was fine too. Just make sure that you restate the purpose of your speech in one sentence. You also need a summary of your main points. This is crucial. So you told me where you're going to go. You took me there. Now you're going to remind me of the highlights. And again, it feels repetitive, but the speech is not for you. It's for the audience people. So you need to repeat that key information, because if I was in and out of listening, I need to make sure I get that information. Teachers know this a lot because we know that students kind of tune us in and tune out constantly, so we're constantly repeating ourselves. So I get your struggle here. But for your summary, you want to think, I need to share my thesis and my main points, and I want to think at least one sentence per main point. So I need to share that main point and something key from that main point. I like to think of the summary as like a mini version of your speech. So if someone rudely came in and just listened to the conclusion, they would still hear what your major points are and some key information. So it's just kind of like a little mini-me of your speech. Main points, at least one sentence. And then, I'm going to write main points here. And then the last thing you do is you provide closure. That means you make your speech feel over without telling us it's over. The easiest way to do this is to relate to your attention getter. So if you told us a story in the beginning, refer to that story at the end. If you told us a surprising fact in the beginning, remind us of that fact at the end. If you told us a statistic, remind us of the statistic at the end. It just makes your speech feel over without you having to go, hey, I'm done talking, thanks everybody. It needs to feel over. And without it feeling over, it just kind of leaves something hanging. A great example of this is if you listen to any stand-up comedian, they always refer to their opening joke at the very end, and automatically the audience starts clapping because like, oh, well, now they're ending because they repeated that stuff from the beginning. It's kind of a natural feeling. You want your speech to feel over. If you have to tell us thank you at the end because it doesn't feel over for you, then you're not making it feel over. So this is kind of the basics of your creating a speech. Remember that informative is very how-to neutral. You should not be sharing your point of view in this speech. In fact, it's ideal if you choose something that doesn't actually have sides. That makes it much easier. If you do choose a topic that has sides, please make sure that you give each side or all sides equal time in the body of the speech. Persuasive is a whole different story. You're trying to convince us of something. So you can relate the topic from your informative speech. You can kind of carry that topic over, but it's a very different speech. It feels very different. Your word choice is very different, and even your sources are different. So make sure they feel very clear. Again, look at that verb in the thesis statement. The thesis statement has that one subject and one verb. That verb should be very informative for the informative speech and very persuasive for the persuasive speech. So that's kind of it in a nutshell as far as how to approach the speech making process. So right now you should be in love with the topic, and you should be in the midst of your research, because very soon you'll be turning in an outline to me where you're actually stating what you're planning for each part, including your outside sources. So you should be looking in the library database or doing some research in person if possible to get ready for your speech, because soon you're going to be turning in an outline so that I can see what's going on with you. All right, so just a couple more key things about delivery, and that is, I know for our first speech we were learning how to give speech on a webcam, and several of you used the computer screen as your notes. It's not going to work. One, we can see your eyes tracking. We can see you reading. We can also see that reflection in your eyes. Do your best to fight that. Your best friend is a Post-it note. So I like to use Post-it notes for my speech notes, and then I hang them right beside the computer, the camera lens. And then that way, if I need to look at my notes, it's a quick little jump. I just jumped over a couple of times. So it's just a quick little jump, and then it helps with your eye contact. I've seen students have a different one for each, for the informative, their introduction, their body conclusion. It's really up to you. Several of the students are choosing to stand, which is great, and that gives you the option of actually hanging the speech notes just behind your computer on the wall. That works too. Or if you're standing a little further apart, you can actually do like a poster board, so that's fine as well. And then finally, several of you mentioned that in your reflections that it's hard to look at a camera lens. I do it all the time, so I'm more used to it. It's still not a friendly face, but I get it. So if it is easier for you to look at a face, bring a face. So ask someone, or 10 people, or whoever, to stand near the webcam, like right behind the webcam, and then talk to them. You can even, before you start the speech, actually turn the webcam and say, look, I'm actually going to look at her while I'm giving the speech, and that's fine. I actually start the counter for your time right when you start giving that attention getter, that first word of the speech.